And yes, Rayshard Brooks was the DWI case down in Georgia. He basically passed out in his car outside a fast food joint. And of course, they called the police because there's a guy passed out in his car in the line for the fast food joint. The cops show up. He's drunk. They go to arrest him. 2 officers. He violently resists arrest to the point of fighting with the police on the ground, going for their weapon, gets one of their tasers, starts fleeing. And as he's in flight and one of the officers is pursuing him, Brooks turns and points the taser back at the officer. And that's when the officer shoots and kills him. Again, this is to my mind, and I've looked at the case closely, a clearly justified use of deadly defensive force by that officer. And for people who are thinking, well, it was only a taser, it's only non-deadly force. No, folks, you got to take this in the context of the totality of the circumstances. A taser used defensively is non-deadly force. A taser used offensively by a criminal suspect who's just fought police for their weapons, that's a deadly use of force because you're incapacitating the officer, assuming the taser works, which you have to assume. They often don't, but you certainly can't count on that. They're attempting to incapacitate the officer. The officer's then helpless against a violent criminal suspect who just fought them for their weapons. That's a deadly force threat, folks. So the officer was clearly justified in using deadly defensive force. And it's not like, it all happened in an instant. He saw the taser, saw it pointed at him, fired the gun. It's not like there was some big lapse in time and then the officer chose to use deadly force when it was clear there was no longer any threat. The threat was right there when the officer shot. But again, we have this racial dynamic, right? We have they'll say the officer shot this black suspect in the back.
Yeah, and that's when I saw it, because there's 2 officers. Mr. Brooks is fighting one of the officers for his firearm, and then he turns to run and points behind him. And from my years of law enforcement, as soon as Officer Rolfe, I believe, was the officer that fired the fatal shots, I assumed he was shooting at an armed suspect. I didn't realize it was a taser until you zoom in on one of the pictures. You could see this yellow object in his hand, but this officer has literally not nanoseconds, but literally milliseconds to make that terrible decision that was brought about by Mr. Brooks's conduct.
So it was clearly a weapon.
Yes, exactly.
Right? So either it was a deadly force weapon like a gun or a non-deadly force weapon like a taser. The best case scenario for the prosecution is that it was a non-deadly force weapon like a taser. Even under that circumstance, the shooting is still justified. Clearly, if it was a deadly force weapon or reasonably perceived as a deadly force weapon, then it's even more justified to use deadly defensive force.